My name is Jess Thorpe. I'm the Head of Research at Nimbus 90, and a very warm welcome to you for the first episode in our webinar series in partnership with Equinix, Future Focus. So in this series, we explore different industries which are experiencing deep level change, and we discuss how companies can respond effectively to technology-driven disruption to deliver modern and innovative services. Today, we're going to talk about the future of media, an industry that I think thrives on disruption and innovation. And to do that, I'm delighted to welcome Langbridge, Head of Transformation at Red Bee Media, and Matthew George, Specialist Subject Matter Expert on Media and Digital Transformation at Equinix. Kris and Matt, hello to you, welcome.
Hey, nice to meet you. Hey.
Brilliant. So thank you to both of you for joining us today. Both of you, huge amounts of experience within the media sector. So hopefully we can dig into some of the issues surrounding the current and future situation across the media industry. But to those of you watching and listening, if you have a question at any time at all, want to pick up on any points that our panelists are making or any thoughts or comments, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So just pop a question in there with your name, company, if you wish to be identified, and I will aim to put them to our panel throughout the webinar. Fantastic. So let's get started. We've got quite a bit to get through. Just to sort of set the scene a little bit then, Kris and Matt. So as I mentioned, the media industry has faced a number of disruptions over the past decade. Advertising, publishing, news, broadcasting have all been upended by waves of digitization, innovative new entrants, audiences who are consuming more and more content in different ways than ever before. Kris, I think I'd like to start with you, if that's okay. I mean, Red Bee Media have been enabling media for almost 20 years. So just to set the scene a little bit, what do you see as being the pivotal changes over the past few years, and set that in some of the context of the work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, Jess, that's a huge question. I don't know if we're going to be able to cover it in the time that we have, and there are so many, but two things really come out for me as the main changes. So first of all, consumers have really changed the way that they want to pick up and use media. And also the way that the cash flows in the business has also changed. And what I mean by that is that today, subscription-based media services, the Netflix of this world, are considered mainstream media delivery companies. And most of the growth that goes on in advertising, which a lot of broadcasters and distributors rely on, has really shifted into the digital domain, into the likes of Alphabet and Facebook. And then not to mention what's really happened even in the last few months with the impact of COVID. I mean, that's just accelerated on these points of change. And we've really seen a massive impact on sports and live events, which has hurt the broadcasters significantly. We've seen ITVs drop out of the FTSE 100. So their shares have fallen by about 60% in value. And Sky News recently said that their revenues are almost down by a half in this most recent quarter when we look at advertising. So those are driving real change again into how the media industry need to cope with and try and innovate against to stay relevant. Maybe a few more points. What we see that if you're a broadcaster or a distributor and you rely on that revenue, if it's sponsorship, it's advertising, if it's pay-per-view, they use that cash to actually drive production. And if they're not receiving the revenue, then of course that's going to impact where the production happens. So that's also creating pressure. And I think, what we've seen in the last 20 years, for example, is that the traditional division of the market into broadcasters, into post-production, into the studios, they're all merging, they're all changing, and you're seeing a lot of convergence between those different types of business. And then maybe lastly, there are new entrants in the market, ones which we'd never even would have imagined more than a year ago, where companies like Twitch and TikTok, I don't use TikTok, by the way, but companies like TikTok, they have an audience share which rivals many of the broadcasters today. They have audience share which many broadcasters would kill for. And that's also creating change.
Thank you. That's an excellent rundown, I think, and summary of. I mean, these are extraordinary changes, particularly in light of COVID, which we will come to a bit later on. Matt, to bring you in, you have been involved in some major changes in the broadcasting industry, particularly, over the past few years. But what for you are some of the key trends and interesting trends that you've picked up on more recently?
So to pick up on your opening point when you were running through those sort of segments of media, because media is such a sort of covers such a huge expanse, as we've got the broadcast media where Red B sits in, you've got publishing, advertising, social media, and in Equinix's sort of vertical approach, we also include gaming in there. So a whole host of sort of in-home entertainment. So a couple of points I think I would make first of all is that, disruption was happening across all of these sectors before COVID. So we were seeing, transformation being required or being driven in numerous ways. If you take the broadcast sector, you've seen this huge shift from traditional linear play out to on demand, to consumption really that is expected anywhere on any device. So that was happening, whether you want to call that, the Netflix generation or the OTT. But within that as well now, you're seeing those broadcasters really try to establish a relationship direct with their consumer. So the likes of, just before COVID, I think Disney Plus launched into EMEA. And, after a successful launch in the US, and what they are really trying to do is build that relationship direct with the consumer. So you've seen a huge change there. It's not just, distributors, broadcasters, networks that have got this content. Those companies that are making the content want to own that relationship. So that's happening. In the publishing sector, everything we tend to consume now is digital. And what that means is that there's a huge demand for video content generally. If you look at the publications, you go onto the websites, they're all producing high quality content and increasing amounts of content. So, our role at Equinix in terms of supporting that transformation is to provide an environment where these companies can get closer to their eyeballs, get closer to their users. They all need to work, I think, much closer to their supply chain. So they need to either digitally interconnect to their supply chain partners to enable them to effectively serve the customers better. And the customers can be another B2B company, or as I was talking about before, it can be, direct to the consumer. Then on top of that, you've got, if we take the areas of social media, we are talking about not just sort of Facebook, but these new short form video platforms like TikTok, where the sort of what I would call the digital natives are really exchanging content. They're obtaining, how they buy, what they watch, that disruption and that change of how people consume content or decide where to watch it is significant. So, the media industry as a whole you could go for each one of those segments and look at levels of disruption. You would also look at who's going to be, there will be winners and losers. Kris was talking about convergence. You're seeing convergence across all of those sectors. If you take a company like Amazon, we work with Amazon as a cloud provider. They're also a massive e-commerce business, and they're now a broadcast business. So you look at the strategy for those huge companies going forward. One, they're driving disruption, and two, they're probably thriving on disruption as well.
Thanks very much for that. I just want to pick up, Kris and Matt, on a couple of things there. Firstly, the D2C model, and I think, probably lots of people have lots of affection for Disney Plus, because I think it's been tremendously useful for lots of us during lockdown, to keep kids occupied and that sort of thing. But the D2C model and the emergence of that, I mean, what do you think is driving that? And sort of technologically, are there any particular enablers, I suppose, to the D2C model?
Shall I start? I mean, I think that's definitely a key trend. And we see that also consumers not only are happy to buy bundled content from a direct to consumer supplier, so like a DAZN or a Disney Plus, but they're also happy to go to their local football club and buy a package of access there. So it seems to be that choice is important, and less so brand loyalty, but more tribal loyalty, I would say. So all of that choice, the same kind of choice that happened with the revolution in shopping with Amazon at the beginning, is now coming towards media, and just that's really what consumers want to have.
Matt, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's just this, you're seeing the value of the content. So, the previous models, studios, companies would produce content for other broadcasters or traditional broadcasters, like the regional broadcasters, the global broadcasters. So I think they've seen a revenue stream that they want more of. And when it was interesting to see the sort of development and rollout, say, of Disney and some of these other services, because they were removing their content from other platforms where they used to make a revenue stream for. So they've obviously shifted towards that, and it is about that direct relationship with the consumer. I definitely think you don't have, when I used to watch TV, there was some sort of channel loyalty. There isn't channel loyalty now. I think there's content loyalty. If you find a particular program that you're watching, you're going to want to know wherever it is, but you don't necessarily go to that distributor for it. I think we're seeing really interesting disruption in the sports market. We've seen DAZN enter that with a very interesting model. We're seeing Amazon enter it, and the rights prices are not going down, so they're becoming more competitive. So you do go back to that old adage that the content is king. So I think there's an element in that companies are really looking at the value of their content.
And Matt, just to build on that, I think one of the key differences that's happened over the last few years is the way in which these companies have had to buy infrastructure and compute to deliver their content has radically changed. So if you were a broadcaster, you would have to buy spectrum space in order to get your content out over the air. You would have to buy a lot of infrastructure to make it happen. And that means you have to fill that space with content. Whereas today you can be a niche content provider. You could specialize in, I don't know, a whole OTT platform dedicated towards fishing, for example, and that's completely possible. And the investment is relatively low compared to what it would have been several years ago, and that's driving up again increased competition and more players in the market.
Absolutely. I mean, to pick up on that point, Kris, and I think that this moves us on to how really how this proliferation of content and this massive innovation and the fact that audiences are consuming more and want more across lots of different devices can actually be delivered. It's in some ways a golden age for content, but clearly there are technological challenges around that, some of which you've highlighted already. I mean, firstly, given that, I think it's about 64% of adults, this is in the UK, watch content on demand. So, viewing habits very much have changed and it's across devices. What are some of the challenges in meeting these demands, in delivering really high quality content when people want it, bearing in mind the variation that we now have? Matt, can I come to you first for a view?
Sure. So we can bring in sort of a term that sometimes gets bandied around here called the edge, which in broadcast industry sometimes has different definitions for different companies as to where they sit. But the edge is really, so when broadcasters talk to Equinix, and what I think we provide them is the ability to extend their network right to the edge, right to where their consumers are, to the people they need to serve. And also at that edge, that is where they can do more in terms of sort of processing or caching content. And the knock-on effect of that is really that it enables customers to be able to consume this type of content. So we are seeing changes where, and our product set will change to cater for these demands, where we can offer companies the ability to reach, these multiple locations, these multiple endpoints. In addition, they can connect with companies that are already in their digital supply chain. So whether that is supporting content creation, post-production and distribution. But also, we're going to move to a phase where everything is very much on demand. People don't want to be tied into these long-term contracts. They want to consume. If you're a company that's delivering a live football match and you're doing that twice a week, you only really want to have the service up and running for that time and some of the supporting elements. You don't necessarily want to be tied into huge contracts. So you're going to be looking at ways that you can spin up virtualized networks to support these type of events. You're even going to be looking at ways where you can probably consume infrastructure as a service, as opposed to having physical tin out there. And these are changes that are being driven by, I think, a whole host of things, by the competition, by the demands of, serving, as you say, multiple audiences in multiple places. And it's going to see a change in the economics of the media business as well.
Kris, to come to you there, I mean, is your definition of the edge the same? And also, what are the technological constraints, I guess, do you see there being to deliver this very competitive, fast-paced variety of content?
Yeah, I mean, going back to what you said about this transformation of people moving to online, first of all, what that drives is cost. For everyone. It drives up the cost of compute, of storage, of the bandwidth required to deliver media, be it short form or long form content that's been created in a post-production studio, or live content from a football match. That's got to be processed, managed, and delivered to the consumer in a highly reliable way, super high quality. And we know what happens to the audience if that quality drops. As soon as quality falls off, as soon as buffering increases in the network, as soon as there's some sort of defect, people get frustrated, they lose interest, and ultimately will switch away. And that directly impacts the revenue chain that needs to drive this whole thing. Secondly, security is a key issue. So as content moves off physical media and is now purely digital, the number of ways in which parties can steal that content, misuse it, or pirate it and sell it in different markets is radically increased. And of course, it's much easier to break into a digital space than it is into a physical space, as long as if there aren't the controls there. So, one of the two areas where we're in Red Bee really trying to apply and offer our value in the market is to help our customers with handling those costs, bringing down the costs of compute, storage, and bandwidth through managed services, through our efficiencies of scale, and ensuring that security remains number one priority in our business, so that when the likes of HBO want to move content to their affiliates, they know that the next episode of Game of Thrones isn't going to make it out online before the actual traditional broadcast time. And then I think one of the other challenges you mentioned earlier on is really about vendor readiness. So we're not just writing software ourselves internally. We're not building our own platforms. We're doing that in some areas where those platforms don't exist. But we're also buying in best of breed technology. And that technology needs to work in the modern digital space. So it should be based in the cloud or a hybrid cloud, we call it. So we have on-prem cloud that we have in our own infrastructure, but also using the public cloud where necessary. So we need the whole industry to come forward in order to be able to offer solutions in those new technologies. And that's been a real challenge for adopting the kind of new services and platforms that we'd like to really accelerate on this journey.
Matt, do you see that as well? I mean, looking at models for adopting the cloud and the readiness of that across the industry, do you see any particular challenges there, echoing what Kris said?
Well, we're certainly in a hybrid world now. I would say we're fully in a multi-cloud world. You know, we used to have conversations, I would say 2 or 3 years ago, when the choice was, well, which cloud provider do I use now? And, you know, Equinix is cloud agnostic. We can provide on-ramp to all of the cloud providers. I think we have over 500 across our locations. And it's about, you know, as Kris says, I think the media industry sometimes has been slower than some of the other sectors in sort of moving forward. It's about collaboration. From an Equinix point of view, that really is our, you know, that is our main point, by bringing, you know, partners, suppliers, anybody that works in a connected, in the media side, in a workflow together, and enabling that direct interconnection. You know, we sort of see ourselves as fueling the growth of those ecosystems, but we do need this mindset to probably change a little. Now, I know we're going to touch a little bit more on COVID. Now, maybe COVID has moved a mindset, has it moved some of that inertia away? But the media industry, it has to change. It has to look at ways of working together. Multiple vendors. We talk to companies, and they now seem to embrace the fact that, you know, you can have discussions with numerous providers, because the end game is to find a better solution. And as Kris knows, you know, we work with Redbee, but Redbee will also work with other data center providers. They will work with multiple cloud providers, and it is about building that solution that is really fit for purpose for this digital challenge.
That's exactly a really good point there, Matt. I mean, this traditionally broadcasting technology and media technology has been lumped into big silos, into monolithic software stacks, you could say. And now what we need to see is greater use of microservices that can interoperate between different clouds to be able to harness the best solution available, and be able to bring those different components together into a solution for a specific use case in the media industry. And that's what we want to see too, is greater interplay between all of these different groups, rather than vendor lock-in.
Absolutely. And actually, this moves us on to talking a little bit more about what the future of media might look like. And there's been plenty of clues. Before we move on to that, if anybody does have a question, we've discussed a lot, looking at some of the technological challenges around cloud, interconnection, then please do pop a question in the box. Alternatively, we've also discussed business models and some of the challenges there. So any thoughts or questions for our panel, please do put them in, and I will grill them a little bit shortly with those. But just to kind of circle back to some of the things that we've talked about, and let's start with COVID, I think, because I mean, Kris, you outlined, well, really the challenges around sporting events and kind of the major pause that was hit there and some of the knock-on effects of that. But really interested in getting your thoughts on what COVID, you know, has it exposed any major weaknesses, well, technologically, and what do you think the responses have been like to COVID across the media sector?
Another great question. I mean, what Matt said earlier on, I totally agree with. You know, COVID simply amplified the powers and force of change that's been happening in the industry. So I don't see that it's changed the direction of change, let's say. But what it's done is, for us as a company at Redbee, it's triggered us to innovate more and know how we deliver our services. So we've moved quite a significant number of staff to work from home, and that's not just administrative or managerial staff. That's also production staff, operators, people. We have whole groups of access services, subtitling, captioning now being delivered from the home, which we would have never have done a year ago or before. So that's a real change in how we offer our services to be more flexible. We've also had to protect those live operational areas much more than a traditional office would do. So we have live operations working 24/7 to ensure the BBC goes out on air on time, that the News at 10 cuts at the right time. And those staff have to be protected from this external threat to ensure that the business critical, or even nationwide critical services, they continue. And then just to move on to the more broader themes, what it's telling us is that we have to keep on changing, we have to keep on innovating, and that means developing on those principles that we have in our own technology approach. And that's about introducing as much automation as we can to reduce the physical or even manual handling of media or processing of information. Microservices I talked about before. Thinking about self-service, so actually giving our customers ways to access and self-serve themselves in our platforms, and really trying to open things up using API-driven exchanges between systems and people. Those things help us become more agile and deal with this kind of change.
Thanks, Kris. Matt, in terms of COVID, I mean, do you feel that media businesses have proven themselves resilient, or how can they, or what have they learned from the recent crisis, ongoing crisis? Yes.
I think Kris covered off some of the technology solutions. I think more from not just the media business, but from at Equinix we have a lens to look at multiple industries. It's shifted a mindset. People have been able to do things that they wouldn't have thought they would have done, or they probably wouldn't have even put on their roadmap. And that's anything from just moving projects forward to actually looking at governance processes. That doesn't mean they've gone into a sort of a totally pro-risk situation. They've just looked at ways that they can do things. And across all those sectors, yes, the incredible demand to have remote working, increased collaboration tools, the fact that, even now as we're sort of coming out of it, some of the broadcasters are realizing, that they can, even though they were doing it, they can use a lot more remote location. They don't need as much kit. They can put that stuff up in the cloud. They can edit it from one country to another. That was all happening. I think it forced everybody into a situation where it was, well, how are we going to cope? And coming out of it, the key thing for me is, of all of those processes that were put in place, which bits are now BAU, which bits do they now maybe have to put some more resilience behind, because some of them, but it certainly shifted us forward, I think.
Thanks. And actually, we've got a question come through. This is from Lawrence Mohammed, and this is, thinking about some of the things that we've discussed, but applying it to another part of effectively the media industry. So what changes do you foresee happening in publishing as a result of the shifts that we're talking about? So will publishing move closer to the creator, to self-manage, track and source revenue? And any thoughts on that?
Well, I think publishing from when we look at our sort of segments, it had a huge sort of increase, while we were all sort of locked down, people were looking for content. And as I said before, that was not just with, streaming companies. Publishing has become incredibly video oriented. The amount of content that is produced in any of our information titles we read, whether that's the fact that we're consuming, news titles on the tablets, whether it's the social channels that we get through, it's all video led. So again, that falls on the same sort of infrastructure that is needed that we've talked about for what I would call traditional broadcast. You need to move that content, you need to get live content, you need to get live news, especially from one point to another. So again, those organizations, some of the news publishers, the magazine publishers, are constantly looking at ways that they can probably deliver that content. Do they deliver it event driven? Is it delivered consistently? again, one thing that COVID has brought out is it's not necessarily cost saving, it's about cost optimization. Is my network set up in a way that is most cost effective? And there's certainly ways now that you, from a technical point of view, you can have a mix of physical and virtual points that will enable you to sort of optimize your network.
Thanks for that. And actually, going back to what you said, Kris, I just want to dig into some of the innovations at Red Bee. I mean, are you finding, I suppose, that there's a high demand for these, and that, I don't know, that companies are really alive to innovating with technology and creating this collaborative and flexible infrastructure that they need?
I think they are. I think there's an inherent willingness to experiment in the certainly in the engineering teams that we have, to find new and better ways to deliver our services, and our eyes are always on the consumer. They're always on, how do we do something really great for our customer that's going to create an amazing experience? Because ultimately our mission here is to make video a fantastic experience for the audience, and that kind of that agile type of kind of, let's say, business culture has been something we've been working on for several years now, because the way in which solutions used to be delivered in the past was very much project focused, siloed into specific customer interests, slow to market. And by moving into this more experimental, innovative and agile way of working, we radically improve speed to market. And then there's a whole change in expectation. So before, everything had to be perfect every single time you made a release. But even now, I mean, how many times does your iPhone update with a new application change? That constant reiteration and constant release of improvements is now also accepted by consumers. And that allows, I think, much more freedom for the technical teams and the engineers to come up with new ways to wow audiences.
Absolutely. We've got a question come through from Karen Braswell, and this actually relates to really e-commerce and I think advertising. So clearly there are changes in terms of how consumers are buying, and huge demands placed on e-commerce now, and we sort of hopefully see that continuing, or potentially see that continuing. But what are some of the impacts of that on content developers and the channels that they use? And I think this is really about the knock-on effect on advertising and the advertising market. I mean, how do they harness, I guess, some of these trends to stay relevant and to do their job? Matt or Kris, I don't know if you want to take that.
I'll take that one. Well, I'll start that one. So we do a lot of work in the e-commerce retail sector, and it's been sort of over the last 3 months, there's two sides to that. You've had the physical challenge of lockdown, which has meant a lot of demand has shifted to e-commerce, and then within e-commerce you've probably had the split between what I would call necessary shopping and probably luxury shopping or non-essential shopping. But generally, as I said, going back to a point that was made, transformation in that sector was huge, was gathering a pace, because you were seeing this, I suppose, shift from the high street to online anyway. But in terms of sort of content as well, I see, the e-commerce sites now, they're their own sort of broadcast channels. When you go onto an e-commerce site, we all remember when you first bought something online, they just used to show you a pack shot. Well, you've got 3D images, you've got video content, you've got instruction manuals. So there is, I think, Kris sits really in the broadcast sector. I've come from, I spent a lot of my what I would call trade career in the broadcast sector, but there's more content produced by non-broadcast companies than broadcast companies. Yeah. So whether that's, a large enterprise, manufacturing enterprise, there's a significant amount of content. So that, again, they have to think about, well, how am I creating that content? How am I managing it? How am I ensuring that when me or you as a customer engaged, the customer journey is smooth, it's efficient, it's, you know, and that all goes back to the principles, I think, of connecting the supply chain, low latency, and serving the end users. Because when you hit an e-commerce site, you could be hitting it from any internet connected device, and you expect the journey to be smooth. So again, the Equinix view is that, you know, connecting partners, suppliers, everybody in your ecosystem together will enable you to deliver that service effectively.
Kris, any thoughts on that? And I'd be interested to know, you know, I mean, e-commerce kind of becoming broadcasters of a sort. Is that a trend that you expect to continue?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a really interesting point, and it's one of the markets that we really are keen to work in. So it's something that Matt said earlier on. Video is really the essence which drives so much of our experience. It's addictive. It allows brands to generate real magic and real really align with their target customer, and so it's infiltrating everything. And the digital world is allowing video to play a major role in how brands reach their consumers. Now, what Red Bee want to do is take all of the lessons that we've learned, all of the tech know-how, the engineering, the best practices, and use that to help also reach those other markets. So go to e-commerce, talk to brands that aren't traditionally associated with broadcasting about how we can enable their media experience, because we believe you treat your audience and your customers in the same way. You still want to amaze them. I think just coming back to more traditional broadcasting, advertising is changing to become more direct. So, you know, the Googles of this world have been doing this for years now, targeted advertising based on your profile. It's more difficult to do that in a broadcast environment because naturally you're speaking to larger demographics. But with addressable advertising technology, particularly within the OTT space, we can now target adverts, insert advertising that's much more relevant to the specific audience and the time of day, where they're consuming it, whether it's on a device, a mobile device, or whether it's in their home. So that will massively increase the accuracy of advertising. I think radically changes the relationship again between broadcasters and the advertising houses of this world and the brands themselves. And then lastly, something Matt mentioned earlier on, and directly relevant to Edge, you know, Edge becomes much more interesting when you need low latency services between the consumer and the actual data processing that's going on. And within e-commerce, the way in which they serve their customer with video, specifically that's been created for that shopping experience, could be something where you could see edge compute really playing a key role.
That's really interesting. I mean, it feels like that convergence is kind of happening, on multiple levels, and is set to continue to the point where, I mean, most companies are in some form media companies now, or they will certainly continue to be in the future.
Well, this is what's happening today, isn't it? I mean, you wouldn't be doing this session in a video chat if it wasn't a compelling way to reach this great community. Video is the way to get a great information message across.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one last question, and I guess this is just in terms of sort of any legacy issues, you know, whether that's in broadcasting or other parts of the media industry. I mean, are there any sort of major legacy constraints? And I guess how are they being dealt with? Just any sort of major trends that you see there. Matt, I don't know if you want to take that one first.
Yeah, I think and I'll talk about this from two sides, my own sort of experience in the industry, where, you know, 10 years ago, it was very much you're sort of delivering, you know, there was the views that content will only be consumed on big screens, you know, especially live events. You know, people want to pay a set amount. All of these sort of, you know, the world of, you know, everyone wants to use PVR. Well, I don't think anybody uses PVR now because VOD is so prolific. You can watch anywhere. You don't need a schedule as such. So, I think, you know, those things have changed very much. But in terms, sorry, what was your? I've lost my thought process slightly.
It's really how you think companies within the media industry are dealing with legacy and how constrained they are by
so you've got that change that you need to adapt with. But I think the legacy, the bigger challenge, I don't necessarily see sometimes as physical and technical. It's a mindset. Some of the challenges within companies is that companies are set up in certain ways. You know, we'll talk to someone who's in charge of networks. We'll talk to someone who's in charge of cloud. We'll talk to someone who's in charge of, new technologies like AI and machine learning. I think it's that mindset of bringing all those together. So you need to have a convergence of your sort of team. And Kris talked about this agile way of working. That has to happen. And that's not prevalent in some of these huge global organizations. And some of these global organizations are getting bigger and bigger. And obviously when you merge or you acquire, you look for economies of scale. But I think one of the biggest challenges the industry has got is that mindset, and also maybe sort of talent, new talent coming through and bringing those people through, because it is the one advantage of digital is that you can go global very quickly. One challenge of digital is that you can go global very quickly. So there you go. I'll leave it there.
Absolutely. Kris, any advance from you on that?
Well, I mean, I would want to underline Matt's point around mindset and corporate structure. I mean, how the legacy isn't just about technology. I will come to that, but it is about how companies are structuring themselves. It's about the financial accounting practices, about how do companies realize their investment, what's the best unit of how to realize that investment, what should we be looking for? Is it growth in audience, or is it actually the cash flow that comes back in? Both have a role to play. But in this current world where you've got the Amazons of this world, Google and Facebook, just piling in with completely different organizational structures and approaches to how they deal with talent management, how they deal with innovation and creativity and diversity. Diversity is key. Those things are a legacy problem, certainly in the broadcast industry that I know. And one of the things Rebbe's actively doing is changing towards that focus on diversity, focus on agility. But there's a big legacy of broadcast history which comes with the past, and that has affected companies in their ability to reach speed to market, because you've got this legacy infrastructure which doesn't do the same things you want it to now. It costs more. You've got to write off assets that you purchased 5 years ago that aren't relevant anymore. The technology's moved on too much, but you've still got it on your balance sheet. You've still got to find a way to recoup that investment. And then lastly, this legacy is caused us. There's a spread. Many companies are spread over different sectors, which are now being targeted by different competitors. And what has to happen in the media industry is they have to pick where they're going to play and really focus on that. You can't afford to be across too many different types of service anymore. You're either your infrastructure or your cloud, or you're about software, or you're about managed services. And if you play across too many of those fields, then you're going to suffer, because you can't direct the force of your company in the right direction. You can't get transformation happening.
Thanks, Kris. Thank you very much for that. We've run out of time, unfortunately. I knew there would be more to discuss, and that has been a really fascinating discussion. Thank you very much, Matt and Kris, to you for your insights. Pleasure. And also to the audience for your time and questions. It's been really interesting. We've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about non-broadcasters, the D2C model, and some of the technological challenges in delivering, I think, what is a really challenging amount of content. So I really hope that everyone's enjoyed listening.